Howdy my friends and welcome to the channel today. I'm Luke, Thunderhead289 here on YouTube, and welcome to the haul of sideline projects, not necessarily abandoned, but projects that have been put on hold for, get busy with life and whatever. So I'm a real person, just like you guys, and I have a lot going on, work a day job and all that. So, from time to time you get things that sit around, like the Supercharged 65, this F100. I've had those for like 10, 13 years. Pretty sentimental, so maybe 15 years now. Anyway, pretty hard to get rid of those. Weird stuff like this. But today, let's step over here. It's been a long time coming, and I've really missed this car, this old 64 Galaxy. So with that, it's been sitting for quite a long time in my own ownership, which is pretty sad and kind of surprising for myself. So before it completely deteriorates into the ground, we're going to get it back on the road today and get back to enjoying driving it, because it was a pretty enjoyable car and hopefully it still is. But from sitting, it has a few issues. So we're going to see if we can clean all that up and then hit the road again. Now a little bit of backstory about this old 64. I picked this up long ago, got it on the road, drove it, enjoyed it way before the general public decided all this stuff was really cool and neat. I picked it up for sub $2,000, and with a little bit of wrenching, it went down the road pretty good. Now, the years pass, you get busy, and it ends up just sitting on your property, sitting outside. Thankfully now it was able to sit inside, spend some time in a storage unit. I had actually at one time tried to sell the car. You can just see how long it sat here. I had tried to sell the car for $2,500 and couldn't get anyone interested. Under the hood here, it is a factory original 4-barrel 352 FE, the good old FE engine. So, FE just must stand for forever. I mean, I know it doesn't, but boy, FEs they are just tanks of engines. My wife painted up this air filter like 3 Vietnams ago, and we put that on when we were kids. So I'm kind of sentimental with leaving it there at this point. Now this is a unique car, being a Galaxy 500, because it has manual steering and manual brakes. It does have the automatic transmission, but I can let that slide because a transmission that's called the Cruise-O-Matic, I mean, with all the atomic era styling, it's just fitting. The old green dot, Cruise-O-Matic, pretty nifty thing, a precursor to the C4, I believe. Now normally I'm pretty good about draining gas tanks, but on this one, I kind of dropped the ball. A lot of times people always bring that up. You don't intend on parking something for a long time, okay? Especially this car that I liked. Life just kind of happens. I think that's the story with a lot of old cars. But with that, I'm going to slide under here, under all these cobwebs. If anyone has a nice 64 Galaxy bumper, I will buy it from you because that is the only thing that I'm sad about on this car. But with that, enough of all that trash. Let me jump under here, make friends with all the spiders, and get to draining. Now this isn't the worst gas I've ever seen, but boy, it's got a pretty potent smell, enough where I wouldn't want to run it through something I care about necessarily, but probably good enough yet where we didn't rust out the inside of our gas tank. I'm sure we'll find out at some point here, but just for the fun science of it and just to show how crap our modern day fuel is, taking a look at what came out of our 64. Now this is a control group of what is definitely bad. This came out of a 1970 Volkswagen I had on the channel a couple of months ago or so maybe. And this stuff, you know, it sat for a really, really long time. If you open this cap and anything, this will not evaporate. It's kind of got an oily consistency and it's really not burnable fuel anymore at this point. Now this is what came out of our 64. You can tell, you know, a little discolored, definitely not fresh gas. And if we had the choice, not necessarily something we want to run through an engine that we care about. Now this is fresh gasoline here. You can tell how committed I am to getting a clear bottle so we could do a comparison. I had to pour out this bottle of water wetter, or excuse me, super coolant, whatever this snake oil name is. Side note, this stuff actually does work pretty good, so, you know, take that for what you will. But all of that aside, this is fresh gas from our tank, and you can tell just a comparison. You know, the older it gets, seemingly the more yellow and more like urine it looks like. So these are not jugs of urine, they're jugs of old fuel. See if I can't get myself some room to work so I'm not standing in gravel and lawn equipment. Seat's pretty nice if I remember. Nope, just kidding, it is not. But we can look past that. It is 60 some years old. So I've been having to think back to years ago to try and remember why I parked the car and thought I need to work on it, and then I just never got to it. So if I remember right, it had a freeze plug rot out on the side of the block where it started weeping pretty good. And it was really hard to get to. I either had to pull the engine or do what I did, which I think I have some ancient video clips here. I must have thought I needed to do valve cover gaskets because obviously these are the original ones with like the staples still in them, probably from 1964. So that'll be fun to get off. But I think the right play before I get involved in all of that is to just simply, I'm going to pull the plugs, throw some lube down, lubricate the cylinders, rotate the engine over. You know, when you store stuff in a building, it's nice, but the humidity doesn't really get out either. So you can get some rust that builds up in an engine. So we want to make sure that's lubed, that rotates, and then we'll fire it up and get it out of here and work on the rest of this stuff. It's not a good sign. Had me worried for a moment. Now I'm not doing anything crazy or overly complex here. I'm just popping the plug wire, taking the spark plug out. I'm doing one at a time because, you know, I'm lazy and then I don't have to make sure I put everything back the way it is because, you know, if you can't take one out and put it back on where it came from, I don't know. You probably shouldn't be doing this stuff. But all that aside, then I just have some, that's a curious name, some of this stuff here, and then I'm just kind of just giving it a little spritz. It doesn't take a lot, just enough so that when I rotate the engine, I don't feel bad about it. But we don't want to hydrolock the thing either, and I don't want to put so much in that I have to hit the key and throw it all out of the cylinder. So a few spritzes and you'll be good. Now, all right, I got pretty lucky here. Cylinder 8 was, I thought we were going to be all done because I could not get it out, and then it was kind of gritty coming out. So Went back in fine, lubed everything up, the threads look good, so I assume we're okay, but we made it through that. So, all right, big old 15/16 here, and the moment I've all been waiting for. Please don't ruin my day. Hey, maybe. Oh, come on. There we go. Was that the transmission? You know, I don't know. Come on, hands. This non-dominant hand of mine, I tell you, definitely not an ambidextrous individual. Do we have the Ford FE water pump wobble? Oh, kind of, you know, like every FE. Ouch, man. And like every time I hit my head on that. Nice. So with priming the carb here, I've always found some spare syringes to be extremely handy. And suspiciously buy these at Walmart too, if you know, conveniently your wife doesn't have a ton of them around, which in most cases I hope she doesn't. Anyway, let's just put this in here. So all we're doing is we're going right to the float bowl and we're just gonna inject this in. And we're gonna do this being a 4-barrel to the front and rear bowl. You know, maybe good 3 or 4 squirts. That ought to be enough on each side for it to fire off. I've always found this just to be extremely handy where you don't have to crank the engine for a long time. If everything's good, it should fire right off this way. You know, you guys probably see maybe 10% of the stuff I actually do. And most of the time I work on things like this and I'm not talking, you know, to you guys, I'm talking to you, but for me a lot, it feels like I'm talking to myself. Combine that with playing with syringes, you know, and I feel like, did I fall out of the funny farm today or what's the deal here? Just, all right, stick the old key in here to run, but I'm going to, dang, I don't want to get my dirty hands all over this nice car, but I want to fire it from under the hood, just so if it does start doing something kind of squirrely, we're right here and we can see it. All right, I procured a good battery from something that I haven't shown you guys yet, but that's beside the point. Not the best angle. It's pretty all right. We'll give it 1 pump. That was kind of hard on things. Okay, just calm down, Luke. There we go, maybe a couple pumps. Maybe set the choke. Like that. Let's see if we can roll it over here. Well, that couldn't crank any slower. That's definitely not what we want to be doing. This is the I'm not asking, I'm telling portion of our show, and this is kind of against my moral code to use one of these things. You know, it just feels wrong, okay, on a classic engine. But the other thing is that really with these, if you do buy one of these, you only really get a few uses out of them and then they don't work as well. So, you know, I pilfered this out of my wife's vehicle in case she would ever need it, and hopefully we don't destroy it because that would be fairly sub-ideal. Okay, is it going to do the thing? I hear it clicking. So now, let's see how she does. Makes quite a difference. Do we have ignition? No choke. Just pop off for us. Ooh, she is ornery. That's not a good sign. I'm gonna let this starter cool for a moment here. You know, this thing is cranking over really slow and we are slapping it with a ton of amps. The battery cables are hot, you know, and it seems like, I know the starter's really old from when I've worked on this car previously. And this is just some of the reason where if you park a car and neglect it, some of the things you get into. Like I said, this is a humid building and it takes its toll on stuff. So if you park a car for something small, like I did, a little coolant leak on this rig, This is the kind of stuff that happens to people. You know, you park them for one thing, you have a whole bunch of other issues come up from sitting, and then ultimately a car never gets back on the road. So we're just about down to our final out where this becomes very inconvenient. Let's cool down again, a little bit of choke. Are you gonna work? Nope, apparently that's gonna do nothing now. So we're on our own. Ooh, actually started. Has a little exhaust leak right here, but if you're familiar with FEs, you know, you get kind of worried about taking these bolts out, okay? You know, next thing you know, you got a snapped off bolt, and you know, when this heats up, I think I remember it seals and it quiets down. So that's one of those things that you just leave alone unless you want to cause more problems for yourself. Isn't smoking at all, so that's pretty good. All right, slide in here. Some of our lights work. Our horn used to work, but doesn't apparently. Brakes are all right, seemingly manual brakes, and they feel like manual brakes, which is what we like. Throttle response is pretty good. A mouse nest just blew out of somewhere when I did that, but not too bad. Pretty darn cool. It's like I parked it just yesterday. It has definitely been some time. So if I remember, I drove this way back in my wedding, and since I'm sentimental, I kind of hold on to a lot of things. You can kind of tell what era that might have been. What else we got in here? That's the letter my wife wrote me day of. What else? Good guys and different things. So it might have very well been. It doesn't seem like I drove it much, if at all, after I got married. Oh no. Got to keep those in there. I try and keep fun and unique things like that around in these old cars that I have, because someday when I'm dead, I don't know, someone will have a good time looking through all my little bits and pieces, and you know, I don't know, and they can theorize about my life like I've theorized about the previous owners of this car and my other classic cars. It's just kind of part of the whole deal, I think. But for now, this FE and this 64 Galaxy is mine, and it runs pretty good, seemingly, after sitting so long. Accelerator pump's good. It's just nothing like a good old FE, I tell you what. Pretty happy little unit, I think. Without further ado here, let's pull this thing out. Hasn't seen the light of day in a really long time. And it's a good runner, and it's been a shame to not be driving it. I mean, look at this thing. Who wouldn't want to drive it? Probably everyone who hates four doors, but I'm not one of those people. Pretty darn dusty. It's what neglect looks like. Let's not brush all that right inside the car. Yeah, that's good enough. Oh, if you ever have one of these old cars and your button likes to get stuck, just a little quick, out she goes. We best get some gas here as we're just about empty, but brakes seem okay, so I think we're safe to go down the road, you know, as long as we kind of take it easy and see how it does at speed. But seems to go through the gears okay. We got our air conditioning open and on, so we're set to cruise and have a pretty good time, I think. All right, we got a full tank of gas, so I'm just gonna try and run it here and see what she has. And it's obviously a freight train. Holy cow. That 4-barrel up there just singing. Now this big old 64 is from the era of back when everyone went drag racing. That was just the big thing, you know, not everyone, I suppose, but you know, it was just part of popular culture. This green dot transmission is real weird. You don't have a low to drive, you have a low green dot, and that's what you have. Now, the legend has it is that you go into low, hammer it, go into green dot, it'll grab 2, you go back into low. Now that'll hold 2, and then when you're ready for 3, you throw it into 3. So against my better judgment, I'm gonna give that a shot here. So that's low right there. Let's just see how this works. Gotta be better with your hands than me, apparently. Okay, well, doing it live, absolutely butchered that. So the steering is just really tight on this car. It says 30,000 miles. Is that 130? Is that 30? You know, a lot of folks say you can look at the brake pedal on a car. I don't know, you know, like maybe if it was driven a lot back in the day, but all this rubber on the pedals today is all petrified. So if someone in the 90s drove this car a ton, I don't think that would show up in the brake pedal. And if your shoes are just plumb worn out like mine, I don't think it would show up anyway, regardless. So, you know, I don't know. It's just a neat old car. Don't do it, me. Just keep driving. Don't look at it. Don't think about it. Just ignore it. All right, not too bad. I'd say our maiden voyage here was a success. Poking around here, remember we found the valve cover gaskets, which, yeah, it definitely needs those. And I thought it was the thermostat housing that was leaking, but it looks like I have water pump gaskets. And I don't know if this car pulled a straight Christine moment or what, but it seems like if the water pump was leaking, it has completely self-healed at this point. So we'll take that as a victory. That's like the only time I've ever seen something like that happen. So I think if we do some valve cover gaskets, we'll be in good shape, at least until the water pump decides to start leaking again, more than likely. But for now, I don't know. Seems like it's self-sealed, so we'll take it. But the valve cover gaskets, you know, definitely done. I think they're worth doing. They're just hemorrhaging from everywhere, way worse than I actually remember it being. And, you know, probably sat and gaskets got even harder than they already were. It's pretty cool. Like I said, I'm pretty sure they're the original ones. Probably have never been off here with the staple going on here and whatnot. So I've resisted the temptation to take them off before because I don't want to ruin my day with seeing something in the valve train that I don't want to see. But I think today's the day. With the excessive use of a rubber mallet and sticking my fingers on a very hot surface and jerking around on this, resisting all temptation to use a screwdriver and completely ruin the valve cover like so many people would, and it's 1,000 degrees, we can see that, oh, look at that. It's a dirty old engine. Big surprise. This car is from before the era of heavy detergents and oil, so it's not at all surprising to see this. And my idea was here is that maybe it would be easier to get off when it's warm. That may be the case, but it's also extremely warm. So that's what you want. Casual 3rd-degree burns on your hands. Could wear gloves, but you know, I could hit it with my purse also. Are you having fun yet? Hey, you should see if that works. You might wanna try pulling the trigger. They're my batteries. I should just let you walk all the way out there. I do. So anyway, that's my wife. One thing I can't unsee is all of this from back in the 60s and 70s. It looks like the detergent oil itself had eaten away at it, but I can't in good faith just put that back on. So big surprise, I always have that around because there's always a bunch of greasy engines all over the place. Will I ever get the gremlin done? I don't know, maybe. If you guys ask me enough and get irritated enough, which you've already done. So in the near future, we'll get to it. The unfortunate thing of doing this is now I'm loosening it all up. So I could have just put it back on, it probably would have been fine. But now, you know, this could come off in big chunks, which would be very undesirable. And sure, I know that sounds kind of like a cop-out, but to do it right, and I like to do things right, I'd have to pull the engine out, go through all the gaskets, and that's just a whole lot of messing around for otherwise original engines that have never been out, have been dead nuts reliable, like the 64 and that 76 over there. 76 having 190,000 original miles, never been out of the truck. You know, it'd just be a shame to pull it out and something happen, and just like this car, you get busy and it never goes back in. So anyway, that's my monologue on that for the day. Don't start projects that you might not finish and take a otherwise running car out of service to do it, because that seems to be what a lot of people do, and I don't want to be one of those. Now obviously this is highly undesirable here. All this cork gasket is petrified onto the top part of the engine, gravity doing its thing. It's just going to try and fall in. I'm doing everything I can to avoid that, and I really encourage you, if you're in a similar scenario, not to be a yeehaw McGee, just scrape this off and think, well, it'll get picked up by the oil filter, it'll come out when I change the oil. Not really the case. What's going to happen is, you know, it's going to sit up here, you have to run the engine to get that down, and ultimately that's going to find its way to the oil pump pickup screen. It's going to stick there, it's not going to come out. Your engine oiling system is going to have cavitation issues, especially at high RPM, and then, you know, you really run the risk of destroying something, all because you were too lazy to do something like this. All right, my friends, looking good. I think we're through the most unsavory piece of this whole process, and we didn't drop a bunch of junk in the engine. Kind of a tedious ordeal, but, and I already feel guilty for being so harsh about that back there, but you know, it's just sad when people have something that they really like, really enjoy, and then it gets ruined for something that otherwise would have taken someone just an extra second to be careful of. So all right, so I think I got the valve covers clean enough that I can at least live with myself at this point. It seems like Ford painted the inside of these valve covers. That's kind of different. I don't think an individual did that per se. But on the FEs, on FE cars, you know, and such, I use the cork gaskets, and I actually don't like them. But if you try and get the rubber gaskets for the valve covers on these FEs, the geometry is just all wrong. You are gonna fight it and just hate it. So I do definitely want to point out that if you are working on a Ford FE, the cork gaskets seem to be like the easiest way to go. Now you'll still get some warbles like this where if you leave it this way, it's going to be very frustrating trying to put the valve cover on and get the bolts in, and it's just more of a nightmare than it has to be. What I ultimately do is you'll have a side that has 3 tabs here that fit in, and I just kind of trim off the very outside end of these tabs until the geometry is correct and it sits on. So you can kind of see this is before, this is after I've done that. Now what I'm going to do is we're going to put gasket sealer on the back side of the gasket to the valve cover and let that set up for a moment. Reason being is that now if we ever take our valve covers off, the gasket is going to stay on our valve cover side, and we're going to follow that up with a pretty liberal application of grease on the engine side of our gasket, so it definitely does not stick on the engine, and we would ultimately never have to go through what we just went through, you know, pulling all this apart. You know, it should be just you take the bolts off and you lift the valve cover off and hey, you do whatever you're going to do, and then you put it back on and it's no problem. So all right, so there you go. I've just skim coated it ever so slightly. I guess we're making redneck reusable gaskets at this point. And no, I have no idea why I'm sitting on the grass, partially in the gravel. So here it is. Before it goes on, I already have the other side done. You know, it's going to feel entirely wrong the whole time you're doing this, but you really do just have to trust the process, and you'll be thankful you did later. Now you're probably wondering why I left the, out of the way, come on. Why I left the valve covers dirty on the outside, but you don't really want to be that guy that has clean painted valve covers on an otherwise filthy engine. You know, I'm just telling you, from people that do a lot of this stuff, that sends kind of a funny message about what you may or may not be capable of. So running out of light here, as is tradition. I suppose we could be doing this in the garage over there, but you know, us Iowans here, or at least my prerogative living in Iowa, is, you know, we only get nice weather like, I don't know, 4 months out of the year, and I'll be danged if I'm going to spend any moment of it inside that I don't have to. And it goes without saying, if you're doing anything like valve cover gaskets, oil pan gaskets, really anything that's a cork gasket, you got your Gorilla hands on, yeah, you're going to want to leave those at home. You know, if you get on there buck wild and crank everything down, it's going to be way worse than when you ever even started. So get your little dainty fingers out and, you know, just stay within the realm of reasonability, because if you don't, it's ultimately going to leak worse than when you ever even started. So totally not worth it. Just needs enough to hold everything down firmly, and that's it. Well, all right, my friends, it started to rain, and I think I'm just going to do something extremely out of character for myself, at least. You know, I don't think I've actually washed a vehicle since I was in high school, which is pretty unsurprising based on the caliber of all my equipment here, but I think this is a car that deserves it for sure. Got the old 76 here parked right next to our brand new Chevrolet. I don't know why everyone says they're such pieces of junk. I don't know. It's treated us pretty well. Now this car used to be a vibrant teal color long before it got all sorts of chalky, and I've just kind of avoided washing it ever since that happened. Reason being, you know, you go to wipe it down with a towel and then you have a whole bunch of towel streaks in this chalk and it just never goes away. So obviously we have some pretty good oxidation and just dirt from all the time this sat in my backyard not running before it ended up here also not running, and in the storage unit and all the other sad scenarios. So anyway, with that, we're going to just go ahead and I'm going to wash one half of the car. I'm just curious because it's like a completely different color under all this oxidation and grime. Or I'm not gonna lie here, I've never been one for washing cars, but just look at how much difference it's making here. You can see on the fender and on the hood is probably the most dramatic. I feel like this car at one point was in a front end collision. This is a different color down here. And this hood has definitely been repainted at some point. I can tell the paint just acts different than the rest of the car. I'm kind of seeing, and as it oxidized different than the rest of the paint, so that was kind of interesting. But I'm just amazed, just a little bit of water in the scrub pad after years and years of sitting outside, I don't know, goes a long way. You know, I don't want to jump to any conclusions, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say that the roof was pretty dirty. I'm just amazed. I didn't realize this stuff would wipe off so easy. I might have actually washed the car sooner if I thought, you know, it would make such a difference. I mean, look at that. Hideous, and then still hideous, but a nice color. This is probably the most satisfying experience I've ever had washing a car. It is the least amount of effort I've ever exerted to make the biggest change I've ever seen. I mean, you can get in here and kind of rub into it and bring some of the paint back, and it's just amazing. Just because it's wet, I suppose, you know, like if you were to touch this when it was dry, it wouldn't do anything like that. Now, if you can hear that thunder off in the distance, our day might get cut short here. If you've kind of followed the weather in 2024, especially for us Midwestern folks, okay, you know, we have just had the most aggressive wild weather, tornadoes ripping right through this very area I live in and every other thing. And this wasn't on the radar whatsoever, and it just completely materialized in the last hour. So, you know, just normal apocalyptic things. Starting to get windy. The birds are chirping. That's just not a good sign. All right, we got through the storm, and I'm pretty impressed. The car has come back to kind of a more teal color. It kind of had almost turned green there with all the oxidation and everything. The only thing that didn't recover is the hood. So I've been digging around trying to find some stuff from like 10 years ago, and I used to care about paint jobs, or, you know, back when I had paint jobs that were actually decent. All right, color me impressed. That stuff is making a heck of a difference. Getting a heck of a lot of blue off on my little scrubbing pad, and it's kind of why I don't like doing this stuff, because I know it's, you know, removing paint Probably why I should wax a car so this doesn't happen. But I'm going to chalk this up as a win in my book. That is, I don't even want to admit that's the first time I've ever washed this car the entire time I've owned it, okay? And that's probably the most shine I've ever seen out of it. I just assumed it was going to be all faded out, so I don't know, you know, I never even tried. And clearly I should have. So with that, you know, we've done pretty good. I'm going to pull out one more trick in my book here to try and get some of this crud out of the engine that we saw in the valve covers. Is it a good idea? I don't know. That's why we're going to try it here today. So we have the hood open here. We have the dipstick pulled, and you can see that the oil that's in the engine is pretty clean, I would say. It's a little bit low. You know, when I fired it up after it sat all that time, the valve covers were just absolutely hemorrhaging oil out of them. So we got all that rectified now. And I'm just curious because there was so much crap in the valve covers that we had to clean out. You know, that's probably elsewhere in the engine also. And since this oil is pretty clean, I've always wanted to try this. I'm gonna, and it's low enough that we can get away with it, I'm gonna add some of this Marvel Mystery Oil to our engine oil while the engine's running. I'm gonna idle it for maybe 20 minutes. I'm not gonna put it under a load, and we can see how clean this is. I'm gonna drop the oil and see how much dirtier it comes out. We're gonna keep an eye on the oil pressure and everything because we don't wanna cut our viscosity down too far. But I'm super curious. I've seen people do this and I've always just wondered what'll happen. And I have run the engine a time or two at this point, and the coolant is holding. So whatever was leaking on the front must have been the water pump, I had thought, because I had the gaskets for it, or the thermostat housing. Either way, it definitely, for the moment, has self-healed. And we'll take it. All right, little FE. FEs are just the easiest starting engines. All right, in she goes. Probably could use a funnel. Of course, we're gonna eyeball this half a quart thing, naturally. All right, my friends, while that's draining here, I have kind of a weird off-topic question for you guys. Also, if you lay down cardboard, you know, helps to actually lay on said cardboard. But anyway, I had to put these beams up to support this old 1940s building, and they are just absolutely ugly to look at because they're the wrong color. Now, I've tried to do something here, and you can kind of see from one side to the other, it's a little bit darker. You know, I just went on the old internet like you guys do, and it was like vinegar and peroxide with some steel wool, and you get this nasty concoction, and you just kind of paint this stuff on. But I think I've had a little unintentional education here, and this must be what's called pressure treated wood. You can see the difference here. I think I'm just putting the rust on the wood, and that's the only color difference. But up here we have untreated wood, and it really darkened it up. So if you have any advice for me to maybe get this to be not such an egregiously awful thing to look at and kind of hurt the whole look of this junky old building, I'd appreciate it. And side note, we are gonna get back to this. It's finally warm enough, you know. We didn't really buff this thing, but we cleaned it up. But this thing is heavily oxidized. You know, it's hard to tell from the video. But anyway, now Derek, he was kind enough to send me some of his whatever this tomfoolery stuff here is. Basically this wipe on clear coat. So when we get this pulled out here, we'll clean it all up and we'll try that stuff out. I've seen that it works really well. And you know, Derek sent it to me, so it'd probably be nice of me to actually try and use it. So this seems like the appropriate car, and if we can bring that orange back to the way it looked, I'm sure it'll be wicked cool. So we got our oil sample here, and if you remember from the beginning of the video, we used this to drain fuel into, and I've never had motor oil in it, only coolant and gasoline. I had it completely drained out, and I feel bad I kind of sacrificed it for this, but that way, you know, there wasn't other oil that would contaminate this. But it came out pretty dirty, I would say. So, you know, I think this stuff does what it claims to do. I don't have too many reservations about doing it, but you know, I don't know if I'd recommend doing it to people per se.